Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's another time to talk about government and politics. Everybody's favorite topic, right? We all know that we love talking about government and politics because surely there's nothing else political or governmental going on in the world. And we can just take all of our time to talk about this as an abstract and it doesn't affect us at all or anything like that, right? Hello, everybody. Hope that you're having a good one. Um, yeah. Um, we do. um, what am I trying to do here? Oh, I'm trying to open Google Earth. I feel kind of empty with the corner down here not occupied by a globe. Come on. There we go. We'll look right around over here tonight. Okay, so welcome in. Let me say hello to everybody. Matt gets here really early. Matt is here like before I'm even here sometimes. Snowlock, welcome in. Good to see you. You got home from a car accident. Holy moly, that's an. Or, I'm glad to hear that you're okay. Um, man, wait. Well, like, were you in the accident, or were you like working to help people that were in the accident? I think I've lost what actually happened here. Tardigrade, good to see you. Welcome in. The music is good. Yeah, so that is it's actually royalty free music and uh, pretty good stuff, and I really like it a lot. I spent a lot of time listening to stuff to try to get what I thought was appropriate music. Fall Machine, welcome in. You went to the grocery store. Does anybody want to start a tribe with you? That's an interesting question. Interesting question. I'll take that as a yes. What's up, Frank? Aloha. Good to see you. Welcome in. So yeah, we are going to do another installment tonight in this series that I started, which is the history of government and politics. And this is in response mostly to the sort of not necessarily. What am I trying to say here? I've been asked a lot of political questions in the last year, and I feel like more people are recognizing that they need to get involved a little bit more, or that they don't necessarily understand everything, or it could just be that more people know who I am, and that's why more people are asking me questions. But either way it goes, I felt like there was a bigger need to discuss government and politics and how all of this stuff works and where it came from and how we got to the point that we are now. So that's what we're doing in this series. If you did not catch episode 1, that is okay. Uh, you can check it out on YouTube. I have started a new playlist specifically for this series, and I will be moving them from Twitch specifically to uh, YouTube as they are happening. So if you have caught up with my YouTube channel, or if you know that I have a YouTube channel, hey, I have a YouTube channel, you'll know that the VODs on there are actually quite old because I'm starting from the beginning of when I first started streaming almost 5 years ago, and I've been adding them slowly over time. But I'll be moving these over contemporaneously. So when we have an episode, I will do my little bit of an edit and send it over to YouTube immediately. So if you miss it, you'll be able to catch it pretty quick on the turnaround. I don't want to have to wait, or I don't want for people to have to wait for what might be years before I catch up with the other almost 200 VODs. uh, so let's skip a few chapters and go straight to fascism. Oh wow, yeah, that would be skipping a lot of chapters because at this point we don't even have the concept of nations yet. So we can't really have fascism, which is a sort of hyper nationalist populist movement, without having the concept of a nation at all. But we'll get around to that. We will talk about all of the isms and we'll distinguish the fact that, like socialism and communism are actually economic theories, that they have government applications, but we'll try to distinguish between the two. But that's for many episodes down the road. I don't even know if we'll get to uh, something like democracy for another 2 or 3 streams. But that will be, of course, by the time we get to uh, stuff like early Greece. But tonight, we are talking about technology and tribes. And before we really start getting into this, it's helpful for us to talk a little bit about what this word technology means in the first place, right? In our modern world, we say that we're surrounded by technology, and this is true. But when we say technology, we tend to mean stuff like, our cell phones or the computers that we're talking into, or microphones or cars or the internet. All of the stuff is technology, yes, for certain. But technology, in its most basic sense, is really just a tool that we have crafted to assist us in a particular way. And what this means is it doesn't have to have electricity, right? So technology can be just about anything. If it's a tool that we can use, technology can sometimes even be non-material, right? We can have intellectual technology, we can have social technology. But this is an interesting concept for us when we're talking about our earliest ancestors, because we started way back at the beginning and we talked about how we were walking around in bands and how we had these small little groups of people that were, maybe 15 to 20 people that were hanging around each other and just trying to make things work in the face of imminent doom and death and danger. But we didn't really have very much government and politics there, because we just had, we had it, but it wasn't as what we described, today as government. We didn't have voting, or we didn't have representation, we didn't have taxation, we didn't have any of that stuff. But just like we still had government and politics in the band world, we still had technology as well, right? We had stone technology, we had wooden technology, we had even then rudimentary knowledge of what plants are good and what plants are bad. And we started making novel concepts of how to use different things to accomplish different tasks. So we started inventing, basic tools like awls to poke a hole in something. We figure out that if we kill a big animal, we can use its skin to keep us warm. All of this is technology. And we shouldn't overlook that basic premise. A lot of times when we think about people that are living in, either primitive societies, or we're thinking back in time about our ancestors that were living 200,000 years ago, we tend to think of them as low technology, right? They don't have electricity. They don't even have metal technology yet. For the vast majority of human history, we didn't even have pottery technology, right? There's a whole period of time, even up into the Neolithic period, where we don't even have pottery. The earliest part of the Neolithic period is called pre-pottery Neolithic, right? So, and that's even, the Neolithic period is still 10,000 years ago, which is still quite a long time. I'm thinking of David Macaulay's The Way Things Work. I'm not overly familiar with that, so I can't comment too much on it. Is that I'm guessing that's a TV show, or could it be a YouTube series, or is it even a book? Tardigrade? I'm not sure, but I'd be interested in learning. So it's a book. Okay, cool. I don't know if I can't say that I've heard of it, but I don't know everything, right? I think it's fairly well established that I am not a possessor of all knowledge. I know some things, and I know what might be considered a general amount of a lot of things, but I don't know everything. But neither did our ancestors, and they still made it through, right? But again, this is what we're talking about. We have bands. Our government structure is very basic. Our political structure is very basic. We're making egalitarian decisions. We are working together to solve problems. We are doing our best to survive in the face of danger. But here comes technology. And this is really what pushes us both socially, governmentally, and politically. Because, and this is sort of a truism, and this is one of these rules that we can apply basically from the beginning to the end of human history, is that advances in technology are going to cause social change. It's just what happens. When we come up with new or novel ways to do things, or when we come up with new technology, it's going to cause social change, but the social change usually lags behind the technological change. Okay, so we have a technological, like if we're looking at a timeline of an event, we'll come up with a new technology, right? And then after that, well, I guess I should say this for you all. After that, we will have some type of social change. But even longer than that is the political change or the governmental change. So technology will change, then society will change, and then government or politics will change. And it's almost always in that order, and it can have really big gaps between when that stuff started and happened, right? So if we look at stuff like the internet, right? We invented the internet, and it sort of came out, and a lot of people got interested in it, and a lot of people started getting online. And when the people started getting online, this affected social change. But we didn't have laws for the internet. There weren't any real ways for us to govern the internet very well. And it wasn't until after social change started happening significantly that the government decided to try to keep up with it for a very long time. And even still today, to a limited extent, a lot of the laws in the United States that govern the internet are actually laws that we invented back when we had radios as the height of technology, right? A lot of the bodies that govern the internet are bodies that used to govern radio and black and white television stuff, right? So the Federal Communications Commission, right, the FCC. But that's lagging behind the event. So we see this happen time and time and time and time again. We have a technological change that will push a social change, and then after all of that, we will have a political change. Doesn't happen every time that way, but it's very common for it to happen that way. What's up, Rexler? Good to see you. Let's get some tech. The first edition came out in '88, but he updates the volume regularly. He's been on Science Friday on NPR a lot. I bet my wife has heard of him. She listens to NPR a lot more than I do. Seems like governments or legislation moves like a turtle stampeding through peanut butter. Correct, right? It's just, it doesn't catch up very fast. So if we're looking at our ancient people, we have technology that starts, right? We have basic technology, but we start coming up with new stuff. And it takes a long time to come up with new stuff, if we're being honest. If we're looking at the ways that we make stone tools, it doesn't change very much very rapidly. And it doesn't change very quickly over the span of time. So some of these old toolkits, the Aldewalan toolkit or the Acheulean toolkit, these things last for sometimes thousands and thousands and thousands of years as sort of the standard way of doing things before we develop new ways of doing things. But what happens around the end of the Paleolithic period, so Paleolithic is Old Stone Age, we start getting newer technology. And some of these newer technologies are going to dramatically change the way that we handle stuff like government and politics, right? One of the things that we come up with is stuff like bows and arrows. And we think of today as, like in my state, if you want to go hunting deer, we have what we call primitive weapon season. And that is where you go hunt a deer with a bow and arrow. Now, our bows and arrows today are, technological wonders, and they're made of carbon fiber nanotubes, and they can shoot an arrow, 200 feet per second. But that's what we consider primitive weapons. When the bow first came on the scene, it was the cutting edge of technology. A bit of a pun there, unintended though. So here's a question from Tardigrade. Is that the change? Is it that the change is slow, or that those in power refuse to change in order to keep said power? And that's a fair question, Tardigrade. The biggest reason I would suggest that this is a lagging concept is if we look at how this happens in primitive societies, where we don't have any sort of real stratified concept of what we might call social class. And we don't really have specialized political positions yet. So if we're still wandering around in little bands of people, we don't have what we might call people in power. We all sort of pitch in a little bit together. And it's not necessarily something that we want to hold on to because we're much more interested in staying alive than we are per se grabbing some means of production or grabbing some position of authority, because they really didn't have too many of those, right? So if we look at what happens when we introduce technology to these groups, we see this pattern happen. Now, in today's world, obviously, we have kind of hijacked the natural order. One of the greatest evolutions of the human capacity is to basically pretend that things don't exist, or pretend that things don't exist, do exist, or treat them as if they do exist, even if they don't exist. And we also have created this magic surplus that has completely hijacked the natural order, right? In nature, surplus isn't really a thing. Nature is meant for survival, and we have evolved to the point where we can think ahead, we can plan ahead, we can work in conjunction with each other in ways that pushes the boundaries of our own ability, and that's been what's given us power over the earth. And obviously here we have really kind of taken that to an extreme, but there's still an element of the fact that even if we do have all the really cool stuff that we have, and even if we are very, very fancy and high technology, we're still genetically basically the same as our ancient ancestors. And we still have the same sort of tendencies based on those survival instincts that we honed over the course of 350,000 years before we really got into any kind of civilization, that dominate the way that we think a lot more than we probably want to admit. One of the things that I'll tell my cultural anthropology class is like you have to remember that people are people, and we have been people forever, and we will be people forever until we stop being people. And the reason we stop being people is because we will have peopled ourselves. If that makes any sense, if you kind of follow what I'm saying there. We are, for all intents and purposes, not that different than our ancestors. We just have fancy and newer ways to kill ourselves, right? You make a nuclear bomb, for example. You love the idea of some Paleolithic dude just strolling up with a bow and blowing everybody's minds. Yeah, like, check this out. I can kill that mammoth from a distance. And they're like, huh, Jimmy, you're full of crap. You can't kill that mammoth from a distance. We all know that you have to chase the mammoths until their hearts give out. And he just goes, bloop. And they're like, look, I killed it. And they're like, oh, this changes everything. Right? You would say that even in the group of people, there's a stratification of power amongst them. So we talked about power a lot, Tardigrade, and what actually, what power kind of means. And we talked about how we are all possessors of power and that we all have inequalities when we compare ourselves to other people. But the attention to those differences is what's really changed over time. In the ancient world, when we're all focused on survival, we recognize that we need help. We recognize that if we are facing all of these problems by ourselves, we're much less likely to survive. The focus of those differences is not for me to one up other people. It tends to be much more towards the idea of, I have this skill, so let me make sure that I'm capable of handling this task, whereas other people in the group might not be as capable. And sure, we're all still greedy, and I don't doubt that there was some, ancient person that in the middle of of a crisis situation made a choice to preserve themselves as opposed to preserving other members of their band, but that person then had to face the world by themselves and were much less likely to survive. So I get exactly where you're coming from, and I completely agree that there will always be some level of comparison and potential hierarchy, but I don't think that it is going uh, to express itself as differently as it does today. Mostly because today we have the magic of surplus, and in the ancient world they did not have that magic yet. We're just a bunch of scared apes with magic talking rectangles in our pockets. Correct. Cave Geek, I welcome in first. Good to see you. I have been reading a lot more about David Turnbull. So David Turnbull is an anthropologist who wrote this book called The Mountain People, and it came out in the first half of the 1900s about this group of people that live in Uganda that are called the Eek. It's I-K is how you spell it. The Eek people, and based on pretty much everything that I can find about him being the author, David Turnbull, and his research, kind of casts that entire book that he wrote called The Mountain People in a very negative light. It turns out that when he went to live and do his ethnographic study on the Eek people, they were going through one of the most significant droughts in their region's history that had ever been recorded. And subsequent people, after reading Turnbull's book, decided to go to the Eek people to sort of try to replicate Turnbull's experience, and did not find the same thing. And in fact found a group of people that were fairly dramatically different than the group that Turnbull claims to have witnessed. So there's a lot of speculation about whether or not Turnbull was just biased against those people because he much preferred the society of the groups that he had lived with previously. And even in The Mountain People, you see him referring to these other groups that he had been around and how those people were better at doing things than the Eek people were, which is obviously not a basis that we necessarily want to come from, because it's clearly not objective, right? But when I read the book, The Mountain People, for the first time, it shocked the mess out of me. The situation that he describes amongst those people is just absolutely horrible. And I still think a lot of the lessons that we can learn from that book are the same, most notably when technology affects people groups, it's going to sometimes affect people very, very differently. So the biggest issue with the Mountain People is that they had been traditionally nomadic groups, but when the governments of Kenya and Uganda had established borders under colonial periods, the Eek people were denied their traditional migration routes because the people that were running those countries didn't want large groups of people sort of moving across porous borders. So they were locked into these mountains and then forced to sort of turn into farmers. But we could talk about that more perhaps later on if you want to, Cave. I'd be happy to kind of go through all the stuff that I've learned about those groups with you. But I don't know if the Mountain People is an accurate representation of the Eek anymore. But that's what happens, right? If they were going through the worst drought in a long time and weren't able to migrate, their behavior would absolutely change. Right, exactly. And see, that's what I'm saying. Like, there's a lot of the book itself can still be valid, even if the initial premise isn't, if that makes any sense. What's up, Ghost Rider? How's it going, man? And KP is here. Welcome in. Huzzah. So, we come up with technology, and we have stuff like the bow. And you might not think that the bow and arrow was that big of a deal, but it really, really is. And one of the biggest changes that this does, it starts pushing social organization. And we have to remember that if we're talking about government and politics, ultimately what we're talking about is social organization. And when we start organizing ourselves into groups, this is going to start pushing the differences between the groups. So this gets back to kind of what Tardigrade is talking about. If we're going to start looking at the differences instead of the combined effort, we're going to end up having social change. And then that is potentially, and in many cases, going to end up with political and governmental change. So we do things like make bows. Now, what does that really do for us? Anthropologically speaking, we create a bow and arrow. Okay, cool. But what this does is it shrinks the number of people needed for a hunting party. Because previously, when we would go out to hunt, we would have sometimes these really big stone corrals, and our job was just to chase this herd of antelope or deer into this big stone corral, and then everybody would stand around them and throw nets over them, the animals, or throw rocks down at the animals, or throw spears down at the animals. And it was sort of a community event where the people that were the fastest runners would go chase the animals, and then everybody else would be expected to dispatch the animals as fast as possible, right? So this was a collective group effort. But if one person can go out with one bow and one arrow and bring in an entire antelope without having to run, this is changing the way that we hunt now. But if we have fewer hunters, because we need fewer hunters, this means there are people that are then going to be asked to do other things, right? If we don't need literally everybody in the band to go out on the hunt, if we can only send half the band out on the hunt, then we start seeing this division. If you're not out hunting, what are you supposed to be doing? Because you still need to be contributing to the benefit of the tribe, or I'm sorry, the benefit of the band, right? You still need to be able to add to the overall production of food. Ghost Rider just wants to pop in and absorb some knowledge. Appreciate it, man. Good to see you. Hope you're doing okay. Sound, what's up? How's it going? Welcome in, welcome in. So it's going to start looking like the best people that are the best hunters need to go be doing the hunting. Because if we don't need everybody, we only need the best people to do it. And if let's say we have 15 people and we're evenly divided and half of us are good hunters and half of us are bad hunters, right? If the people that are going out to hunt, if half of them can produce now more food, right? Maybe we should just do math. Let's say it took our entire band of 20 people to take down 3 deer, right? Half of our people are going to be herding them into some sort of corral, and the other half of them are going to be throwing spears or breaking breaking sticks off and bashing them, or throwing rocks at them to, kill them into the corral. Well, now we've got 10 people that are going to go hunt, but instead of killing 3 deer, those 10 people are going to be able to kill 5 deer. That's a 66% rise in food production with a 50% lower involvement from the tribe. So you can already see how this is going to have potential impacts on the social order. We need fewer people, but we can make more stuff. And this is what technology does. It lowers the number of work hours into a task, and it funnels things down into where smaller and smaller groups can do it. Because technology initially is always designed to make something easier, or make something faster, or make something more efficient, right? This is what technology does. But this causes social backlash, because when we start sending half the group out, we want to make sure that we can send the ones that are the best at doing it, the fastest ones, the strongest ones that are going to go hunt. And inevitably what ends up happening here is we start developing gendered roles in our bands. And it's going to be the men that go out to hunt and the women that go out to do the gathering. And we're going to see a fairly significant shift here where you're going to start seeing man jobs and woman jobs. Now, we know today that this is, obviously gendered, and we have a lot of different views of this today than we did at the time. But that's really pretty much how it ends up boiling down, historically speaking. But what that does is it shifts the roles of these people in our group. Meat is one of the most calorie-dense types of food that you can eat. So meat is going to be a much more sought after addition to the diet in many cases than plants, roots, nuts, berries, etc. So the provider of the meat is going to have a little bit more prestige. Even if we're still an egalitarian band and we're still sort of working together, even my ability to produce meat for the food is going to give me just a little bit of an edge. And if you don't think that doesn't have political ramifications, I don't know what world you live in, right? So what do our women group do? Well, they tend to go out and start looking for plants, but this gives them more time to look for plants, and they become more observant and they become more involved, and we start focusing on certain types of plants because we want plants that are going to have the highest calorie content for the least amount of work involved to get them, right? KP says, I'm administrating the distribution of work to those who also help in the administration. The ones who hunt and gather, they're all lazy slackers who can't manage to be an administrator, therefore deserve less spoils of their labor. We are getting there eventually, but we're not quite there yet. Technology removes me from the fruit of my labor. Therefore, we must till the soil with our bare hands to more directly understand how I contribute. Well, that's part of it, sure. So that's why it was such a big deal that meat was back on the menu, right? And we all know that when you're dealing with orcs especially, you kind of have to give them what they want. Otherwise, they'll try to kill you. Orcs are bad, though, right? So, okay. We're looking for better plants. We're looking for more plants. I have more time now to spend sorting through the types of plants that exist, but we start recognizing things. And we start figuring out that we can do certain things on a small scale that are going to have potentially big impacts. So the earliest proto versions of farming are usually just basic impacts on the land. So what am I talking about here? Well, let's say we're wandering through this area and we know that we kind of make a big loop in this same zone about once every 2 or 3 years, right? So let's say we come up on a berry patch and there's a whole bunch of vines here. While we're here eating ourselves silly on berries, we could also walk among those berries and pick out all of the other plants. We can pull up, grass, we can pull up trees, we can pull up any sort of other competing plants in that area. So next time we come to this zone, there are going to be more vines and more berries. So this isn't farming, right? This is not agriculture. This isn't even horticulture. This is just basic technological effects on the land, right? We can do things like recognize that crops or plants grow better where the ground is wet. And we can look at stuff like, if we kind of spend an afternoon and knock down this little bit of land, the next time the river flooded, it would flood into this whole area over here, and it would make that area produce a lot more plant material. So while we're walking through here, let's just, get down here with our hands and just dig a little trench in this hill. We're not talking about moving an entire hill. We're talking about moving maybe 5 or 6 cubic meters of dirt. But next time the river floods, it's going to fill this area up. That's going to fertilize that area more. And those really cool fruit trees in that area are going to be producing more fruit next time we come by. This is the kind of stuff that we're talking about, right? There's a new berry patch right in the spot where I pooped last year. Fertilizer is actually a really interesting development, and we don't see that until quite a bit later on. We've still got a couple of iterations before we kind of figure out stuff like fertilizer, right? So this is just basic observation that things yield more word of mouth, combined observations. Exactly, Ghost Rider. We're talking about stuff where we are so far back in history that we don't have writing. We're just passing this down by word of mouth through our groups. And because we are observing the natural world, we can affect the natural world. But that concept itself is actually a technology where we recognize that we have the power to affect the world. That's a technological advancement, right? Just seed disbursement, right? What's up, Rod? Good to see you. Welcome in. So we're going to see basic clearing of land kind of stuff, right? Very, very basic kind of stuff. We're going to see small scale, unorganized, not even necessarily purposeful irrigation. But then we're going to recognize if we can affect the world in little ways, we could maybe affect the world in bigger ways. And we start domesticating stuff. We domesticate the dog about 15,000 years ago. And you go, what does that have anything to do with government and politics, Shane? You've been wandering around here for 20 minutes talking about ancient people and bands wandering around in the woods. Domesticating the dog is a huge benefit in government and politics, because when we have dogs, they can do work, right? And when dogs can do work, that means our band as a whole produces more work. And when we have more work, we can support more people, because that's ultimately where we're headed, right? We domesticate animals going back about 15,000 years, right? It's another 4,000 or so years before we start domesticating plants. Now, why is there such a lag there? Why do we recognize immediately, if I can get that dog to help me, that's going to make my world so much better? And we could just breed these dogs and we can make them nice by keeping them around us. What's the difference between that and domesticating a plant? Well, there's actually a good explanation for this. Again, in our ancient diet, the vast majority of our high calorie content foods are going to be meat based, right? And if I can use a dog to help me track something that I've shot, that's going to be much more beneficial to me than domesticating einkorn wheat, right? Or emmer wheat. These are some of the first crops that we domesticate. If you eat a handful of grain, you're going to get some calories out of that. And you can survive on that, sure. But let's just be honest. Is a handful of grain kernels going to give you as many calories as a big hunk of, deer or bison or rabbit or whatever you've got? No, it isn't. Also, if we're just probably being for real, the meat tastes better. I mean, nothing to vegetarian friends. You can make vegetables and, plant material taste excellent. But we're not talking about stuff with seasoning. We're talking about I roasted wheat and mashed it and now we have gruel. Or I killed a buffalo and we can have a steak. One of those tastes better. Well, at least to me anyway, right? You have your own taste. That's fair. To our ancient family members, they thought the meat tasted better. It's just the truth. And there is a lesser push to domesticate plants because we are doing so much better with the technological developments getting meat. But we eventually figure out that we can do certain things to increase crop production. We come up with new concepts like slash and burn agriculture. No, I'm sorry, slash and burn horticulture, not agriculture, horticulture. Where we will go into an area and we realize that if we cut all of the stuff down and then burn it, if we put seeds in the ground there, it will actually grow really better. It'll grow really fast because we know that the ash has a lot of nutrients in it and it's returning that to the soil as fertilizer. So this is kind of the early version of fertilizer. We don't understand that we can sort of move that around. So it's not like we cleared a field and then fertilized it. We're just chopping stuff off and burning it to make room and then make it grow faster. What's up, Claudio? Welcome in. Your dog is very political, right? The dog here likes to argue with us, right? A GPS makes your band less likely to wander into the woods. That's true. You're less likely to find that gig that the lead singer swears is actually going to pay this time. That's also true. RimWorld has taught me that pets consume the same amount of food as people, but do 20% of the work. That's fair, Tad, but let's also remember that in the ancient world, the amount of work that we are doing is not the same amount of work that people are doing in RimWorld, right? So we don't have people, developing nanotechnology like we have in RimWorld. We don't have people building houses like we do in RimWorld. We don't have people that are, developing new interstate technology. I don't know. We're not building rocket ships or making a giant maze of traps that all of the bad guys will run through and die as they're passing through it. Right? We're not making murder mazes in the ancient world. So the type of work that we're doing in the ancient world is much more rudimentary, and the cost benefit of analysis of having a dog in the group is significantly higher, right? Just for their even being able to sleep more soundly at night because you know that the dog is going to wake up first if somebody comes by. That is by itself a benefit. Uh, you know, so the situations are different, but I understand what you're saying. Woodshop, what's going on? Welcome in. Fat makes your brain happy. It actually does, right? We need a certain amount of fat to keep our brains functioning, right? It's specialized work. That's true. That's very true, right? Ancient dogs weren't the fat, lazy, overfed excuses for dogs we have today either. They probably lived on the verge of starvation most of the time. That's probably true, but so did most humans, right? Right? We were not ever really that far away from the end. Um, she barks at the wind, so you feel safe. Yeah, the fact that my dog loses her mind every time a cat walks by is it just makes me feel more comfortable when I'm asleep. Our dog will bark at the deer that move around in our yard. And if we were in the ancient world, there's no way that we would be able to take our dog hunting, because as soon as she saw a deer, she would just start woofing and the deer would run away, right? But all of this is technology, and we're all developing this stuff, and we're becoming bigger. When we start making technology that makes food easier to obtain, our populations can grow. And when our populations grow, this has a whole domino effect on our entire existence. Not just our technological existence, but our social existence and our political existence. If I'm wandering around with 15 people, we can probably figure out how to handle things amongst ourselves. But when we're producing enough food now that we've got 50 people in our band, now it's really hard to try to organize how everybody does stuff. And you're going to have more instances where people just rub each other the wrong way, or more instances where Jimmy and his cousin get in a fight and everybody else has to sit there and listen to them argue with each other, right? As we grow in size, our political and governmental makeup has to shift with that. Now, for a long time, if a band got big enough, it would just sort of fission off and the bands would go in different directions. But the kicker for our period of time here, and we're getting to like the 15,000-ish year ago mark, to about the 10,000-ish year ago mark. So basically the very end of the Paleolithic period. It's not just one band that is growing in population. It's all of the bands that are growing in population, because technology has this capacity to spread from band to band to band, especially because we're exchanging members quite frequently, right? Remember that we have family groups that might leave this band to go join another band, and they go, hey, check this out. We've developed this new technology that we can use. And this is stuff that kind of propagates outward. And it's moving quickly for the time. It's not moving quickly today. Like today we think that quick is, 2 or 3 minutes in the microwave. And if it doesn't, get to us faster than that, we're just upset. But we can see the snowball rolling faster starting during this period of time. And whereas humans had made maybe 4 to 5 big technological shifts over the course of the previous 300,000 years, by the time we get to about 15,000 years, how many different technological shifts have we made since then? Right? In the last 15,000 years, we've gone from figuring out bows and arrows and domesticating dogs to me being able to talk to you around the world on the internet. That's 15,000 years. Compare that to the 320,000 years where we were wandering around in the woods. Right? We are moving at a massive rate of speed, culturally speaking. That has direct ramifications on our politics and our government. Your corgi has protected the house many times from the wicked delivery man of mail, right? Don't you know that cats are trying to kill everything? They're just small, so the dogs need to bark at them. True. What's up, Flask? Good to see you. Your dog has squirrel traumatic distress disorder. Yes, we refer to squirrels as tree rats because they must be evil for our dog to hate them so much, right? What's up, Macaroni and Brie? Good to see you. Welcome in. Cats are valuable once you store grain to kill the rodents. Correct. You don't know how useful they would be before then.
I'm Spartacus.
Maybe not so much. What's up, Tuna?
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
Tuna, thank you so much for the subscription. And I hope that your trip is going okay. Welcome in. This is an interesting stream. Too bad you missed the first one. You're probably going to need to go back for the VOD. Claudio, you weren't here at the top. But I'm moving these real time into YouTube. So I've already uploaded and made a playlist for the first one, and you can literally go watch the first episode immediately after this one if you want to. Frank.
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
Thank you so much. It's a bit of a joke. I don't know how well that went over, Frank, but thank you so much for the gift sub to Claudio. You know what you'll have playing when you crank out chores tomorrow. So, Bree, I've been moving VODs from my old Twitch streams over there. So there are, I think, about 100 different episodes of various sorts over on the YouTube channel. I am a little bit less than halfway through moving all of them over. All of the History of Middle Earth streams are over there. I think they're about 30 or maybe 20 viewer requests and I think 50 or 60 Adventures in Histories. Ra, I am not a dad. I don't have any kids. I claim my students as my children. So I get to tell dad jokes because I get about 250 kids every semester that I try to teach like mine, like my own kids, right? So, yeah, Ghost Rider, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Middle Earth is in Tolkien history. Yeah, so I've done a whole stream of History of Middle Earth, which is exactly what it sounds, where I talk through the history of Tolkien's Middle Earth as if it was real history. I get honorary dad joke status. Exactly. We are about 12 followers away from having another episode of History of Middle Earth. I'm a big Tolkien fan, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if anybody else knows that, but I'm a huge one. But technology leads to a more stable life because food becomes easier to obtain. Because food becomes easier to obtain, our populations can grow a little bit. But technology also makes things less stable. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. It obviously makes sense. In this particular situation, more population means more problems. Our social transitions have not caught up with our technological changes. And our political shifts haven't started happening at all, right? We grow fast because of this ability to produce more food, but then we have the social problems that try to follow up with them. We're still trying to deal with everything with the old-fashioned egalitarian problem-solving method, where we sit down with each other, we have it all out, we all talk to each other, but that's much harder to do in a group of 50 than it is in a group of 15. So this causes issues. Also, we are now over-hunting and over-cultivating. If you're doing slash and burn horticulture and I'm clearing an acre of territory and then burning it, I can't do that again for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years. So what we're doing is we're making more food, yes, but we're also much more directly affecting the earth. And if we hang out here for, 3 or 4 months, we're going to kill all of the food in the area. Then we're going to have to move again. So we're still facing the same problems. We're just running into them faster because we have a higher population now. So you gotta keep in mind that it's not all positive. Hobbit was one of your favorite childhood bedtime stories? For sure, for sure. So you're saying that we were so busy wondering if we could, we never stopped to ask if we should. Correct. We grew before implementing support for the extra growth. 100%. 100%. And slash and burn is a lot of work. Right. But we were able to do that work because our technological advances freed up labor of some of the group so that only part of the group had to go hunt and the other part could clear land and do slash and burn. Right. We couldn't do that as the size of a band because we didn't have the time to do that because everybody else was involved in hunting or everybody else was involved in everything else, right? So it's we've changed and we've done some things better, but we're also still struggling with other stuff. We have the give and the take, right? We're fighting to advance, but we're also fighting that we have advanced. So one quick moment here. Somebody asked me in the last stream if I was a fan of the book The Dawn of Everything. And overall, I would say I'm not really, but there was a part where it's in like the end of the first quarter of the book where they decided that they wanted to talk a little bit about this concept of the noble savage. And they talk about how this was kind of concocted, and I really actually appreciated that portion of the book quite a bit. This idea that people have developed that somehow in the ancient world that we lived in perfect harmony with the earth, that we didn't take more than it could give, and that we preserved nature, that idea is kind of crap. We are not preservers of the earth. We did a better job at it then than we do now, but ancient people overhunted areas. Ancient people cleared land and burned it and sucked all the nutrients out of the soil, right? They had to move because they couldn't find more food in that area. So they went to more areas and then did it there. They were just having smaller scale impacts on the earth, but they were still having impacts on the earth, right? They were not living at some sort of magical harmony where they knew we can only kill 5 deer out of this herd. No. If they were hungry, they were going to kill a deer, right? This I don't like this idea, right? I don't think that this is one that's helpful, because what it ends up doing is allowing us to compare ourselves to this false image. And sometimes that's a beneficial thing, right? Like if we can compare ourselves to an ideal, we can recognize that we're not ideal. But if we create the ideal out of thin air, it's not necessarily beneficial, right? It's just not really that good of an idea. So the fact that it was popularized by Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a little bit questionable. He definitely played a role in it. I don't think it was as much as Dawn of Everything wanted it to seem. They made a fairly interesting and convoluted argument that he was the one that came up with this and that made everybody else like it. I don't know if that's the case. I appreciated the fact that they said that it was an invented idea. I don't necessarily agree with the way that they said it was invented. It took the words out of your mouth when you said it was on a smaller scale. That's why it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal. We're still not talking about huge populations, right? We're not talking about the Earth 10,000 years ago having a population of 7 billion people, right? We're talking about the entire Earth having a population that may have numbered in the single-digit millions, right? We might have had 9 or 10 million people scattered across the populated world, right? So, maybe 100 million by the time we get to agriculture, but we're not talking about gigantic populations. Let's remember that it was all the way up until like the 1980s before we hit 1 billion people. So we're not talking about gigantic, massive populations. Earth and harmony don't seem to go well together anyway. Competition for resources is woven into the fabric of life on the planet that doesn't seem to lend itself to harmony. Well, the creation and the destruction here are the two sides of harmony. And that's when we think of harmony, we tend to think of only the side that nurtures and protects and gives peace. But for harmony to exist, there has to be death, right? Uh, there has to be some sort of decay system. Otherwise, there wouldn't be enough. If we ever get to a point where we just perpetually propagate and nobody ever dies, we're going to exacerbate that need much more quickly. I'm not trying to say that I'm pro kill everybody. I'm not one of those people that's like we should limit the population of humanity on the earth. I'm not one of those people, right? I'm not. I can't. They have a name, and I can't remember exactly what the name of the group is, but like, there are some people that say like we should kill everybody down to a certain number of people, and that's the number of people that the earth can hold, and da 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 da. Not those people, not me. We could actually support a much higher population if we were just more efficient. The vast majority of our problems today don't lie in technology, they lie in lack of efficiency. Because we have gotten to a point where a surplus is so easy for us to obtain, we take it for granted, and then we waste stuff. And if you don't know that we waste food, you should look at how much food gets wasted from Walmart superstores in the country of the United States over the course of a year. It's enough to feed a country, right? Would we have seen some tribes settle in particularly lush areas, or was that not a sustainable before agriculture and hoarding? I don't know. We totally would focus on the areas that could carry more people. So there's a term here, anthropological term, called carrying capacity. How much can the land carry? How much food and resources does the land have in it that can be turned into provision for human habitation? And every area of land and type of land has a different carrying capacity, right? And we migrated, and when I say migrated, I mean like quite literally migrated. When we left Africa and were migrating across the globe, we were focusing on areas that were lush, right? Like the Nile River Valley, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, the Yellow River Valley, the Yangtze River Valley, right? We are focusing on these areas because it is lush and we can find food easier there. If you look at when the really rough habitation zones are populated, it tends to be the last ones on the list, right? The number of people that lived in Siberia is never going to be as high as the number of people that live in a river valley, right? And when we're talking about migration patterns, the people move along the equator zones much more rapidly than they do outside of the tropical zones, because those tend to have, more water, more food, more vegetation, more resources. So, got to get going. Happy you popped in. All right, Neg, good to see you. Hope you're having a good one. It is gross, Lumpy, the amount of food that we waste. To maintain profits, that's true too. Food is so incredibly easy to come by these days. It's wonderful and frightening at the same time. It is Flask, but that's our society not catching up with the technology that we've developed. This is the same problem that we had. Our technology today is such that we can produce massively larger amounts of food than we actually need, but that has not caught up with our social order, and that definitely has not caught up with our political order, right? So we're not even to stage 2 of coping with this yet. So it's the same process, right? If we and we're just now starting to recognize how gross our overproduction is, and we're just seeing the earliest attempts to try to legislate that stuff. But politics and government are always the third step in that phrase. You're very rarely going to see a situation where politics is going to be the one that forces social change. You're going to see social change forcing politics to shift, not the other way around, right? So that's what happens with technology. Now, we have advances in technology, and this is going to lead us to the creation of these things. Tribes. We're going to stop being a band. We're going to become a tribe. But what does this mean? Well, a tribe is different, and a tribe is going to have to answer different questions than a band would. And a tribe is going to have different political and governmental organization than a tribe. It's not dramatically different because we're not moving at leaps and bounds technologically. We're still moving fairly slow, but we develop more technology because of this growth, and this sort of leads back into this more rapid movement, right? We're developing things like horticulture. Horticulture is not agriculture. Horticulture is basically growing a garden behind my hut, right? I'm going to go scratch out some land and throw some seeds down. I'm not even going to till or, make rows. I'm just going to sort of broadcast seed. We know that we can grow emmer wheat or einkorn wheat or barley or gourds or fig trees or stuff like that. We know that we can grow these things because we've domesticated them, but we haven't made it to agriculture where that is the primary staple of our food. We're still just using this as a supplement to hunting and gathering. Now, when we make tribes are going to be bigger. Tribes are 100 people, maybe more than 100 people, 125 people. But there's still a natural limit to a tribe. And this gets very political. One of the biggest reasons that there are limits to a tribe is because there are a limit to the number of social bonds that we can make that we can trust. There are just a certain number of people that you can natively trust. You can't trust 1,000 people. There's just no way for you to develop a close enough bond with that many people so that you could put your life in their hands, right? So think of how many people right now you trust to make decisions that directly affect your life. And I bet you that it's not more than 20 people. 20 is probably even stretching it, right? So if we're living in groups of 100, right, closer to 0, that's fair. Yeah, don't mess with my food, right? Are we going to play capture the flag and then spawn camping? Not quite. You have a small tribe. That's okay, Blake. That's okay. But that's natural for humanity, right? So imagine what happens when we go from living in very, very small groups to living in tribes where we have maybe 100 people or 150 people, maybe 200 people. What does that do to us politically and governmentally? Well, it changes us. Who are these people in the first place? How are we related to them? What's our connection with them? Well, a tribe is going to be basically still a kin group or what we might call a clan. We're probably going to have some level of blood connection to these people. Maybe we all share a same descendant, like a great-grandparent or a great-great-grandparent. Maybe we have combined a couple of the regional bands, so we have a cross relationship with them because we've exchanged members over the course of the last few years as moving around in bands, and now we're coming together as one big tribe. You're probably going to have some heritage related to these people early on, and that helps making bonds with these people, but it doesn't completely eliminate the mistrust. Also, Blake, good to see you, man. I hope you're doing well and that your tribe is doing well, right? We're still going to try to solve our problems using the old style, right? Tribes are going to initially look a lot like bands. They're just going to be a lot bigger, but we realize pretty quickly it doesn't necessarily work that way, because with more people comes more comparison. With more comparison becomes the inequality becomes much more evident, and as we are producing more food, we have more time on our hands. Now, we don't have 14 hours of free time a day, right? This isn't what we're talking about. It's not like we wake up and then goof off for an hour and then, or go work for an hour and then goof off for the rest of the day. We're not doing that kind of free time. But we have a little bit of time where we don't have to work. And that just leaves us bored, and we start coming up with problems, and we start picking fights, and we start recognizing that this person has a little bit more than us, and that breaks down the bonds. Now, tribes still don't have really big recognized social structures. We're not talking about that. There aren't tribes that have social hierarchies where I'm a lower class tribe member or middle class tribe member or upper class tribe member, because we're still not to the point where we have specialization. We're not getting to the point where one person can just do one thing and that's all that they do. We're still expected to pitch in with a lot of different chores. We're all going to have a lot of different things that we're involved in, but you're going to be getting to the point where you're better at some stuff than you are at other stuff. And we're talking here about whole sections of the population that are going to be better at some things than other things. And somebody mentioned earlier the division of labor. We're starting to see the division of labor happen. We're starting to see stuff like these are jobs for these kinds of people and these are jobs for those kinds of people. Now, we're not talking again about full sort of class-based society here, but it's getting more evident that we're making differences between ourselves. Very little time for Xbox. That's true. When concern for survival lowered, we became more concerned with the idea of fairness and justice. That's a great point, Bree, and I agree with that in principle. I might want to like quibble a little bit with some of the wording. I might say that when the concern for survival became less paramount, our awareness of other inequalities became more. The awareness of our inequalities expanded. We'll just say it that way. Like, when the only thing that it wasn't that we're, just lowering our worry about survival, right? It's that we're now able to think about something other than just survival. And when we were able to think about stuff other than survival, we immediately filled that in with the most human things possible. That person has more than me. That person does this more than me. That person gets this more than me, because we're greedy. And it's okay to admit that. We just can't let that greed dominate our actions and our thoughts, right? Survival got a little easier, so we were able to allocate that amount of attention to something else. Exactly. That's exactly what happened. And one of those things is, politics and organization and government. Crash Course were citing estimates that Stone Age people probably worked 6 to 7 hours each day. Opinion. I would say it's probably more than that. But we also have to remember that their lives were not as complex as ours, technologically speaking. So, for example, it's a lot easier for me to stream on my computer to you all right now at 8:10 p.m. because we have electricity, right? In our world, we can work a lot longer hours because we have technologically advanced to the point where we have that capacity, right? And their work is, right, exactly, Bree. Their work is limited to the number of hours in a day. And especially during something like the winter, when you might only get, 10 hours of daylight total, working 7 hours out of that 10 doesn't seem that sketchy to me. Like, that's probably kind of okay. But I would suspect that that's not an accurate yearly average. I would say it's probably more than that. And another thing that I would point out is that there's a difference between working 7 hours straight or working 8 hours straight and working 8 hours that's spread out over a much wider part of the day. And let me explain how that has an effect on us. If I have to do 8 hours a day of work, but I'm only working the second half of every hour. So let's say I'm going to work 7:30 to 8. And then I'm going to work 8:30 to 9. And then I'm going to work 9:30 to 10. I'm going to work 10:30 to 11, etc., 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 etc. Those 30 minutes of rest are not the same as me having 2 hours of unbroken rest. Does it make you understand what I'm saying here? Like, we work in chunks much more than they did, but they filled their day with more work. Part of that is because they're walking everywhere. We can get in a car and drive to work, and it takes me 30 minutes. You know, if they were going to go the same distance, it would take them a day and a half. Right? So them moving around, they moved a lot more than we did. They burned more calories doing that than we did. I don't know if I'm being very clear here. I have a very clear picture of this in my head about what I'm trying to get across, but I don't know if I'm necessarily conveying that in a way that makes any sense. We have more unbroken free time than they ever did. We have more capacity to have days off than they ever did. We have much more time to rest and recuperate than they ever did. They might have done fewer actual physical number of hours less work than we do, but our lives are much more leisurely than theirs were, because their work was much more physical, much more demanding, and was much more dangerous than any of the, well, not any, but most of the work that we'll ever do. Right? So please follow up and ask questions if that didn't make any sense. In a band of 15, there can't be much income inequality because everyone is not quite starving level, but when we get wealthier, some people obviously have more. Frank, that's exactly correct, and that's what's going to be one of the biggest political changes that we'll get to after I catch back up with Chad. Glorious technology allowing us to work for 20 hours a day. Something like that. Yeah, we've made it to where we don't go to sleep now, right? We just always work. Was fire around by this time? Yes, we did have fire making capacity at this point. Not just finding it in nature and preserving embers of it, but we could start fires with various different methods that we had made technologically at that point, correct? And seasonal events like hunts and harvests must come in bursts of relaxation. Exactly, Lumpy. There might be days where you don't get any break at all. And then, you know, you have a day where you get to collapse at the end of it. But this would be like working a double shift for a week, maybe, right? You're curious to how different their sleep needs were. Biologically, not really any different than ours. The average ancient person got much better sleep than we do in most cases, though, because they were sleeping in their natural circadian rhythms, and they weren't staring at blue light out of our cell phone screens at 1 o'clock in the morning in the bed. So they actually slept probably... that doesn't make any sense. I would suspect that they slept much better than we did, even if they were sleeping on the ground or wrapped up in hide blankets. Your step counter says you walk an average of 8 kilometers a day. Lumpy, that's great, but that's not very common in the modern world. I don't know how much I walk a day, but I doubt it's 8 kilometers. And there's no days off in terms of survival. Exactly, Tad. Exactly. Like, you don't get to go... I'm just not going to hunt or gather today, right? I just don't really feel it. Because then you don't eat that day. There's also the extra work that we don't always calculate. For instance, if I need new clothes, I go buy them. If they needed new clothes, they had to take time off and make them from scratch. Right. Their subsistence was much more labor intensive than our subsistence is. That's actually a great point out there, KP. They had much less control over their work schedule and environment. That's true. They were more or less at the whims of nature and the weather. That's also true. It's not just how much they were doing the agriculture part, for sure. You can have days of no pants and have food delivered to your lair. Exactly, Lumpy. We can have goblin days. Ancient people didn't get goblin days like we do. Junk Collector has it on good authority that we didn't start the fire. Junk Collector, I've heard it's always been burning since the world's been turning. It makes tons of sense that they were getting better quality sleep because they weren't doom scrolling all night. There we go. Sleep was split up, though, based on circadian rhythms. We have this efficient 8-hour clock, but the 8-hour clock is actually really unnatural. Yeah, they would probably not sleep in big chunks like we do. 10,000 steps a day is the magic number. Step counter broke. Muffin's at 12K average. Wow. You're curious about whether their much more active lifestyles meant that sleep was much more important or crucial. Yeah, it was. They were doing much more physical labor than the average person in the world does today. Billy Joel. Flask, I don't know if you were around when we did it, but I actually did a series of 2 viewer request episodes where I went through We Didn't Start the Fire and did a little bit of a blurb of history about every single one of the things referenced in the song. So that was a pretty fun 2-episode series. I liked that one a lot. What happens if 2 tribes go to war? We aren't really going to go to war at this point. We're definitely going to be able to have conflicts with other tribes. But war is probably not really a thing. So if our guys show up with bows and arrows and spears, and their guy shows up with bows and arrows and spears, and we kill a few of each other, that's probably about as much as it's going to get. A lot of early conflicts in primitive groups was probably much more posturing, where we would show up with our big groups and we would try to make loud noises and be scarier than their group and their people could make, because ultimately we realized that we are all still fairly close to death, and killing each other isn't really good for anybody. If it came to killing and we have one clash where 2 or 3 people die, that usually solves most of the problems. Because if we're talking about whole-scale mobilization of all biological males between 15 and 50, that's what's inevitably going to happen. Is you're going to kill all of them, and then you're going to have to support their women and children and old people, because those people are going to start following you around. And you don't want the social burden of taking care of all of these people, because you can't produce enough food to take care of all of those people. So we don't really get like armed, like armor conflict kind of stuff. At this point, most of the technology that we have is offensive. We don't even have the advent of the shield at this point, because we're not really fighting people. We're just trying to kill animals. And it turns out that you can shoot a bear with a bow, or you can shoot a human with a bow, and they both die. But we're not developing our technology to be used against other people. And that's pretty evident by the fact that it's not necessarily very efficient to use spears against people, because so if I've got you in my sights and I'm trying to throw a spear at you, you can dodge, right? It's not really a good weapon to use against a human, because I can just get out of the way. If I see that you're about to throw a spear at me, I'll just go stand behind a tree. Spears are really good, though, for when you're crouching in the bushes and a deer walks by and you pop up and go, "Pwah!" and you spear the deer, right? If I'm going to go fight you on a battlefield, not necessarily the world's best efficient weapon. I have to throw a bunch of them, and then if I don't hit you because you've moved out of the way, you pick all my spears up, and I don't have any spears anymore. I've got to go make more spears. And while I'm making spears, I'm not hunting, and I'm not killing food. And that's a waste of time. So we're resource starved here, and war is at that time very economically inefficient. Today, war is unfortunately very economically efficient because we have military industrial complexes, but that's so far down the road. Anyway, tribes. We've got all these people, we're building it up, and we're going to end up with a big political shift. And that is the development of this concept that we call first among equals. Now, in some cases, you might see this referred to as the big man. In some cases, you might see this referred to as a matriarch or a patriarch. But what we're talking about here is a political and governmental shift that is going to start affecting our tribe because we have advanced technology and we have bigger population groups. And with those bigger population groups, our inequalities are much more prevalent, and people are going to have time to recognize those, and people are then going to be able to start capitalizing on those. Yes, intimidation over violence is correct. You watched a small documentary on sleeping patterns of medieval peasants. They said it was 2 blocks of 3 to 4 hours. They would go to bed early in the evening and wake up for 1 or 2 hours to eat and do tasks, and then 3 to 4 hours of sleep. This is correct. This is why you see so many references to the small hours of the morning, or why the night watch was actually a thing, because people would sleep and then wake up and then do sleep stuff. Animal fights for mates, we can't be too lethal or both groups will die. Exactly, Frank. Exactly. It's a Pyrrhic victory, correct. There's not a whole lot to take. That's true. Like, what are you going to get if you do all kill these people? We're squishier than a lot of big game. That's very true. I'm quite squishy. Flask says, Richard Evans Shuttles, a botanist, spent many years in the early 40s living among tribes in northern and southern America researching plants, but he wrote a great deal about tribal life, and it's fascinating reading. I've heard the name. I've never read anything that Shuttles ever wrote, though. That would be something that's, I would definitely go get that. But Professor, what's up, Moose? Good welcome. Good to see you. Welcome in. Professor at MSU told you sleep back then was in chunks because of the dangers that lurked around at night looking for food. People would wake up every couple hours or so. That's true. So Macaroni and Brie, a first among equals is not a chief. Anthropologically speaking, a chief is a different designation. The chief is the head of a chiefdom, and that is a different level of political organization. It will be the next one that we talk about. So when I do the next one of these streams, we're going to talk about what a chief is and what it represents. And when we get to chiefdoms, we're going to start introducing a lot more. Yeah, so this is the head of a tribe. Right? So a first among equals is the head of a tribe. And usually this is probably going to be somebody that's an elder initially, because we're going to be basing this on wisdom, based on experience, right? So the first people that we're going to have are the ones that we're probably already looking up to. But as this changes, we're going to start seeing more people get into this position. And again, this is, to be clear, this is not an officially appointed political position. This is not an elected position. This is just a sort of commonly recognized, commonly accepted position. But you can get there through a variety of ways, right? Maybe you just have a massive amount of skill in food production. Maybe you are just the world's best horticulturalist. And as matriarch of your tribe, you are first among equals, and everybody goes, you got to go talk to her. She's kind of like the person that you go talk to. She's the point person. Maybe you're just the strongest dude and you've literally beaten the crap out of everybody else in the tribe. You might end up first among equals. But here's where we develop new social technology. You can end up first among equals because of charisma. Charismatic power is one of the most fascinating concepts of social arrangement. You can get in power just because other people think you should have it. You might not possess the best food production skills. You might not be the best hunter. You might not be the strongest person. You're just charismatic enough to convince people that you should be in charge. Maybe you're just really intelligent. Maybe you're just really cunning. Maybe you're just conniving. But you can get into a position of first among equals just through charisma. Maybe you're just really good at building social bonds and you have this innate ability to put coalitions of people together. If enough of the tribe says that you're kind of the first in charge or first among equals, you're the first among equals, right? It's just something that you can kind of come into. But again, because this isn't appointed, and because this isn't a position that you're elected to, the person that's the first among equals, that can change really fast, right? That can be me one day, but I can not be it tomorrow, right? Charisma is literally how our modern political system works. A lot of it, right? It's the special system, right? And the C in special is charisma. And everybody that's played Fallout knows that. I'm actually playing Fallout 4 again right now for what has to be the third or fourth time. I love that game so much. You got that skibbity riz. KP, it hurts me even reading those words, especially knowing that you typed them. But you aren't guaranteed first among equals, right? You get it today, you don't get it tomorrow. If you screw up too much, you're not going to get it. If you make people mad, you're going to lose it. If you get old and you can't, hang anymore, you're probably not going to be first among equals. If you get outsmarted and somebody is more charismatic than you, you're out of luck. Because this, again, it's not a full-out political position that's elected or appointed. It's just the person. So what does this person get if they are the first among equals, if they are the matriarch, if they are the big man? What's the benefit? Well, you're kind of the chief diplomat. If you run into another tribe, you're probably going to be the person that they send over to talk. Right? Now, to be clear, you don't have unilateral ability to commit your tribe to anything. You're just the one that gets to go talk. So you're going to say your part, and the other person's going to say their part, and then you're going to go back to your tribe and say, they said this, and then there's going to be a discussion, and then you're going to go back and tell the other tribe what the decision was, right? You're not like deputized to make decisions on behalf of the tribe. You're the talker and the listener, because we recognize that if I've got 50 people talking in this direction, you've got 50 people talking in this direction, nobody's listening, right? They get the fanciest hat. Blake, you're not wrong. There are several tribes of people that we have on record, especially in like Southeast Asia, in the islands of like Indonesia and Malaysia and Borneo, where the big man, which is where we get the term the big man, gets to wear the fancy headdress. And I'm not even joking. They get the cool hat. If we've moved to another village location, right? So we've exhausted the resources of this area and we're going to leave this area and go to another place and set up village for a little bit. I'm, as big man, probably going to get to pick where I want my hut to be. And I get to kind of pick first, right? So I'm going to get that best area under the trees where it's shady, or by the water where I can, get water real easy. I probably get to pick where my hut is. If we're going to have a big communal fire, I probably get to sit down in my spot first. If we go on a hunt, like Bree says, I might get my pick of the cuts of meat first. Maybe if we're going to have a group discussion, I might be the one that gets to speak first. Or maybe I get to speak last. If there's a position of authority, maybe I get to speak in the position of authority, right? If people tend to ask you for advice or lean your way on things, then your goal is just organically get advanced further than other people's goals. Frank, exactly. And that's the thing. If we're able to convince people, if we have that silver tongue, if we're going to be able to get others to believe in our methods, that's going to give us more social power. But this is leading us towards more political power and leading us towards more governmental power, because we're still in a system that has politics and government, even if we don't have formalized or centralized politics or government, because we're still human beings and we still organize our power. And if we have somebody that is first among equals, we're going to end up having a ability in that position to affect the power of the tribe. This sounds a bit like Jane Goodall's research into troop leaders among her chimp study groups. The meanest, toughest John Wayne chimp was never the leader for long. He would be quickly beaten down and put into his place. Flask, that's actually really great, because Jane Goodall, I got lucky enough to hear her speak one time. She's a fascinating individual. Her work among chimpanzees has given us a lot of insight, and we are not really that far from chimpanzees. I mean, genetically speaking, we're obviously very close, but socially speaking, we're not that dramatically different. We obviously have a more developed sense of imagination and a much more developed prefrontal cortex, but like socially, we're not super different. But that's a good point. Like, we see this not just in our species, but other species, where if a person gets too big, the group recognizes that, and you are not over the group can decide you're not in charge anymore. And then they just collectively decide you're not in charge, and then you're not in charge, right? You were going to mention her a bit ago concerning chimp groups, but going to war against other groups. Yeah, so even that, though, like, the chimpanzee wars aren't really wars the way that we would think of wars. They're just very brief moments of conflict that have somewhat lasting but ultimately temporary effects, right? But again, we're not super duper far from them. But again, just to clarify here, our first among equals is not a chief. This person is not a king. This person is not a president. This person is not a prime minister. There are very real limits on this power, because they are not first. They are first among equals. They are still part of the group. They're still expected to work within the group. They're still expected to fill their tasks out as necessary to provide for the common welfare, right? And if they don't do that, they lose that. And the decision here is again made in a very egalitarian manner. You just don't get to wear the cool hat anymore. You don't get to pick next time we move village. You don't get to sit there next time we're having a discussion. And maybe you don't get to talk last. Maybe you don't get to talk first. But that itself keeps the power in check. Because if the power comes from the group, and the group then can take the power away, you're still part of the group. And that's a fascinating political concept that we have divested so far from ourselves, where now our leaders are literally above prosecution. Whereas in the ancient world, if our first among equals gets a little bit, too big for their britches, we just collectively say, sit down and shut up, and they sit down and shut up because they realize that the alternative is they're going to kick me out of the tribe. And again, exile is horrible. We don't want that, right? You die that way. Nobody's taking your cool hat. I hope nobody takes your hat, Shipment. I hope that everybody recognizes that that is your hat, and then you get to hold on to it forever. We don't want a president of the free colonies experience. Yeah, from Battlestar Galactica. Exactly, right? Junk collector, if you want the hat, that's okay. And if shipment wants to give you the hat, that's okay, but you can't take the hat. If you take it by yourself unilaterally, that's not the agreement of the tribe. Now, if everybody in chat agrees that shipment is not worthy of the hat, then shipment might have to give the hat up or take the hat and leave. But I think it's totally cool for shipment to have the hat, right? So the cool hat is just an upside down KFC bucket, right? For now, right? We need to evolve politics until you can create a hat coalition. That's how a lot of governments work. We just don't do it that way here in the United States. All right, everybody. So that's kind of where I want to leave it for the moment, because the next steps are really, really big ones. And if you want a little bit of a preview of what we'll talk about on part 3, we're going to create an actual surplus, and this changes politics forever. Somewhere around like 6-ish thousand years ago, we figured out how to make more food than we need. And oh boy, did that change the game. It's starting to sound like a bit of The Sopranos here. Yeah, I mean, it kind of is, right? And one of the reasons why it's easy to demonize groups like The Sopranos is because they act on a social structure that doesn't follow our rules. It's much more sort of survivalist tactics, and we look at that and go, oh, that's uncivilized. But we used to do that forever, right? I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, that's the way that humans handled stuff, right? In a relative sense. That's true. That's true, right? But yeah, so if anybody has any additional questions about anything, feel free to ask. I really enjoy talking about this stuff, and I'm glad that people seem to be responding well to it. So this is justifying me doing the stream and the series, so I am quite happy with how that's going, and we'll kind of hang out here for a little bit because I see where we're going to raid. So an interesting thought is coming to mind about effort towards insulating from extremes. Are you talking about how group consensus keeps people towards compromise and middle ground, and pulls people towards the center instead of allowing people on the fringes to make the decisions? Because that's exactly true. If you had a truly radical idea in this period of time or this level of civilizational development, you had an uphill battle to get other people to agree with you, because the tendency was to maintain consensus, to not do anything that's massively upheaving the social order, from not spending the most amount of time sleeping, or both sides retreating before conflict gets to lethal risk. Yeah, so again, like, we're with the level of risk that exists just to survive, any kind of additional risk is going to have to be calculated really, really carefully. You don't run off and do things very extreme, because let's say that we can, and I hate trying to math everything, but it's sometimes one of the best ways to explain this stuff. Let's say we have 10 risk points, right? And we can use 10 risk points in a week. And every day we have to use at least one. And we have kind of a surplus of maybe 3. Right? So if I show up to class or group meeting on Monday of the week, and I say, We need to take this risk, and this risk has a rating of 6. Well, there goes all of our bonus risk and takes away 3 more from the rest of the week. That's a big risk. You're going to have to argue very compellingly to get me to agree to that as a member of the tribe. It feels connected in your mind somehow. There's some wild contrast with how that species preservation instinct has changed. I don't know if it's really changed as much as we're channeling it in different ways. We're much more inclined now to cancel people we're in conflict with. But see, I would argue that particular, the concept of like canceling somebody online or unfriending somebody or kicking somebody out of the group is easier today because we have a surplus of social contact. And that is something our ancestors never had. We know more people today than our ancestors ever did. Ever did. If you've been in a room with 1,000 people, you have been in a room with more people than the average human met for 50,000, 100,000 years. There just weren't that many people around. If you've ever been to, let's say you went to an NFL football game and there are 50,000 people in attendance, right? You've been in a room that had more social connection in it than your great-great-grandparent ever saw in their entire life, likely. We just have a massive amount of social contact. I read the other day that there are only about 60 years between the Wright brothers and Apollo moon landings. I don't know the exact number, Flask, but my gut doesn't say that's wrong. Canceling is just saying this person cannot be first among equals. There's an attempt here at actually recreating the exile, right? We're going to try to exile this person by canceling all social connection with them. The problem and the reason that canceling doesn't work overall is that there's so much social connection available now that if I get kicked out of the main group, I can still go find another group to get socially connected to, right? And in a certain way, getting kicked out of the main group is going to induct me into the not main group that hates the main group, and I'm going to immediately be able to find social connection there. It might not be the preferred social connection, but it's still going to be social connection, where I can immediately take a position of leadership, where I can immediately have maybe even more social power among this group than I ever did among the main group. So the attempt here at exiling via canceling on the internet doesn't necessarily solve the same. It's attempting to solve the same problem, but it's not going to affect the people in the same way. You're saying that the rate or ratio hasn't changed much, but the scale upon which we interact with other Avengers is amplified so much that it feels more. Yes, exactly. It's the scale thing. Like, we're just around more people. And it's much more noticeable. Exactly. All right. So I've already talked for 3 hours today, and I've got to go talk for 3 hours tomorrow. So, let's go kick a raid. I had a fascinating exchange with a local government lately, a beautiful ballet of bureaucracy. Junk Collector, the way that you're saying that, it tells me that you're saying this sarcastically and that it was a horrible experience. I just hope that you won. I hope that you won. All right, everybody. Yeah, so let me say thanks to everybody, and we're gonna go kick a raid off. You and your dad wanted to plant some trees. Oh, in the city limits? Oh, best of luck there. So thanks for everybody that came by. I appreciate everybody. if you're in chat and you can see the people with the really cool, well, I think they're really cool, with the little badges beside their names. These are people that are subscribed to the channel and that support me. Thank you, Big Tuna Neil, for the subscription, and thank you, Frank, for the gift subscription for Caldillo. I also want to thank everybody that just came to hang out tonight. Bree, thank you so much for the bits. Also, I want to make sure that I say thanks to everybody that supports me on Patreon, and that everybody that has sent me books to read. And yeah, let's go raid. When we get there, yell adventure, and we'll hopefully be back around this weekend to do some stuff. I got an extended weekend, so might be some extended streaming. Who knows? We'll see. But until next time, everybody, have a good one. Take care of yourself. Stay safe in the weather. Have a good one.